Thank you, everyone, for the last part for today. Then we have a panel discussion, and will be lively, and the subject will be about GenAI for drug development. Then I'm Bérénice Wulbrecht. I'm leading the solution enablement team at ONTOFORCE, and I have the pleasure to have today in the panel Allan, which is Corporate Vice President, Data and Knowledge Discovery at Novo Nordisk. Michel Dumontier, which is Emerit Professor at Maastricht University and co-author of the original FAIR paper, and Mathew Woodwark, which is Head of Data Standard and Interoperability at AstraZeneca. Then thank you for being with us today. Then we will start with, we will have 3 themes for today, and the first one will be about data for AI. Then the amount of biological data is about doubling every 2 years. And every year we are generating 2.5 exabytes of data. That means that we have a huge amount of data. Great, AI needs data. But my first question will be like, first, this large amount of data, a human alone cannot analyze this, and it means that we need to have power to get into this data. And my first question will be, do you think that GenAI need data, right? We know that it's quite data greedy, or does data need GenAI in order to formalize this data further? Who want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's pretty obvious from the composition of the FAIR principles, the idea was really to prepare data for AI. I mean, the idea was that we need to do some work to make sure that the machines that act on our behalf can find and reuse these data. So for GenAI, this is already clear, right? The aspect of the internet made data findable and accessible with these standardized protocols so that content could be consumed. And it's also interoperable in the sense of HTML and, it's regular structured information. So very easy to capture. But on the reusable part, this is where there's a bit of weakness, right? So you see, we have a lot of content that has been ingested in GenAI that we don't know the licensing for. And people can test, did you use my data in your models? It is not clear. And this, again, shows just how important the FAIR principles are for principled development of technologies like generative AI for a broad use of applications, right? So I think the two are made for each other. All right, FAIR envision these generative agents that could reuse the data, but then GenAI requires high amounts of data. And more importantly, while most of the applications are unsupervised learning, it's clear that for many of our specialized applications, we're going to do retrieval augmented generation. We're going to take specific data collections to answer particular questions. Or we're going to do fine-tuning. We're going to use some labeled data that is very important for the use case, and we're going to fine-tune a model. So again, I think FAIR shines right through and says, if you're going to do these kinds of applications, everything you see in the FAIR principles clearly applies.
So if I can build on that, Michel, I think you said the data is interoperable. I think depends on the use case and how interoperable that data needs to be. So I think Stephen in the last talk articulated it very well. Being able to put some structure around your data, understand, is it really comparable, or at least the metadata, is it really comparable, helps drive the value. So I completely agree with everything you've said about the fact that they're made for each other. What we're finding in terms of particular use cases when it comes to asking questions of the data using GenAI, it depends on the type of question. Do I want to see a general trend? What's happening in the industry in the next 5 years? Do I want to see some summarization of some information? That's fine. Do I want to know what the dose range is for my patients? I need a lot more rigor for that data before I can answer that kind of question. So there's use cases and use cases for this. But I think the interoperability and helping structure your input into large language models gives you a lot more value on top.
Do you want to intervene? Like, do you think that?
No, I think that's fully. I fully agree with the things proposed there, but I also think it's interesting to look at it in the other way, that we begin to also utilize large language models to actually make data more accurate and prepare the data in a sense which accelerates how fast it actually becomes amenable for GenAI approaches. I think that's a really interesting development, which probably is going to continue going forward.
And just again, another build. The other thing that we're seeing is people are now, their horizons have expanded. I'm not even going to ask that question because I know it's impossible to answer. And now they think, well, I can ask any question. So now we're telling them which questions are currently impossible to answer, even with an LLM and GenAI. So there's more work to do in terms of making that data queryable in a way that gives a meaningful answer. But suddenly the cross-study, cross-data set question, I just want to see everything in my space, has become a common occurrence, which makes it interesting and challenging, but yeah.
I have a question, like for your project, for AI project, do you have specific data strategy that you want to put in place within your organization to support them, or is it still booming and you still go as it comes towards data for this AI project?
I think it's a mix in my organization, Novo Nordisk. I think we've been on a long journey, or not long journey, it's actually quite short, it's a few years. But I think when we started out, I think it was maybe, I would not say random, but it was not very organized how we actually applied AI. We found use cases, specific use cases where we thought we could get quick wins. And for that reason, we applied it for those use cases. Most of them were efficiency gains, right? You have image analysis and you have, maybe you have peak-based data, you can accelerate the analysis of that using machine learning and so forth. But I think there's a trend now which goes towards actually doing, preparing data sets upfront of a much larger magnitude, which can then really be used for larger projects. So that's kind of the journey we've been through in our organization, which I think is kind of a trend.
Yeah, okay. Mathew, do you want to intervene at AstraZeneca?
Yes, so I mean, we had the phase of letting 1,000 flowers bloom and lots of AI projects. That followed on because that was triggered by the Gen AI revolution. What we had before that was much more structured machine learning projects where you had a defined use case, a defined goal, and you were coming up with a specific requirement. Then we had suddenly, let's try all of these things at once. Now we're finding that some of those aren't coming up with the kind of answers you'd expect, and there's more of an emphasis around preparing data sets for AI, as you said. So we've garbage in, garbage out. But we're not going to do what the tech companies have done and develop these massive LLMs based on huge amount of input. But those massive LLMs don't have our data in them. So that data is behind our firewall and it's sitting inside. However, if you try and use just our internal data to create a new LLM, it's not enough data. So there's a bit of a quandary. So your inline learning and RAG approaches that you just outlined, that's exactly what we're doing to try and fine tune things to use the LLMs to assist on our querying of our internal data. And that's one of those challenges we've got right now.
Michel, you want to answer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from our perspective, an academic lab, maybe there are 2 points. One is, I sort of ask my students, if you're going to do fair data, what that means is you're going to prepare a data set, for whatever task you have. You're going to push it to a repository, a public one. That could be Hugging Face, that could be Figshare, whatever it is. You're going to do the hard work of putting it out there. And then you're going to use their APIs to retrieve that data and to use it in the pipeline. Yep. So I think this is the operationalization of FAIR. But when it comes to the AI work that we do, I think one of the biggest aspects, and you sort of hinted to it, is when the machine or when the agent does not perform as you expected, you kind of want an explanation, right? You want to understand what is the basis to make that decision or that prediction, right? What information was used or what was important in driving that particular thing? Sometimes you can get these model-based predictions, even out of language models and other kinds of models, but they're insufficient. What you want to know is when there's a prediction, when there's an answer that's generated, what makes you believe that it's true?
Yeah.
What would convince you that this actually has merit? And this is where we sort of turn back to our curated data collections, our knowledge graphs, our databases, our scientific literature to fall back on and say, can you construct a story, a narrative that helps us understand why this is a reasonable prediction to make?
Yeah.
So this is a really important consideration. I think in the maturation of the AI technologies is you get the wow factor initially, which is this is amazing. And then you go do your use case and you go, well, that's not quite right. And you go, I need to pull in at that moment all the relevant information to evaluate what is coming out of that. So this is what we have to, this is our time, let's say, the data scientist, the data prep time, is to bring this at the time that those decisions have to be made in evaluating the outputs.
Then you go a little bit to my next question. That will be like, GenAI has a promise to speed up the drug development, to decrease a little bit, to increase the probability of success of clinical trials and get the drug faster to the market. Today, it's more considered as an assistant towards different tasks and process. We are talking more towards like autonomous system, perhaps even breaking some paradigm of the drug development process that is today to new perspective. What is your feeling regarding that? Do you foresee more an assistant like for a couple of years? Do you see a breakthrough towards more autonomous or breakthrough into the process soon? What's your feeling?
Maybe a little of both. I think the autonomous concept there. I mean, we have, for example, we see more developments of closed loop optimization setups where you have a huge degree of automation for experimentation, which is then linked up to some kind of AI, which then determines what is the next experiment. I think that is going to accelerate immensely going forward, because that can help us optimize processes, preparation of our compounds and so forth. And I think there's a lot of investment in getting that up and running. It combines automation and AI. And then for the assistant part, I think we're already seeing now that people, many companies, including ours, we are trying to look into how can we actually get information retrieval at a much different level than we did before, tapping into full text literature, patterns, so forth, combining that with our own text-based literature, using LLMs to really interrogate the information we have available. So I think we'll see both things accelerating these days here going forward.
We have a similar situation in that our first application of AI was in the lead space in terms of molecular selection. And we've got a full end-to-end pipeline that's now all AI augmented to enable us in the small molecule space to identify the right leads, predict affinity, test affinity, all of that. And we have, it's slightly more complex in the large molecule space, but we are making advances around affinity. In the later stages, to the point about if something goes wrong, you want to know why, we can't be in a situation where if the regulatory authority says, and why did you make that decision? Because the computer told me to. That's just never going to work. So we have to understand where to apply this technology, what's the risk profile. We definitely can enhance the information retrieval and do some decision support type solutions based on that, but there still needs to be a human in the loop when it comes to making critical decisions involving patients. We're not going to move to a scenario where the computer told me to. That's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I'd have to argue that the generative algorithms are predictive in nature.
Yeah,
they're not automation tools,
no.
Right? They have the potential to produce a wrong or misleading result. Even when you provide all the relevant information, even to do a summary, it can be wrong. So it's really important to understand what's the role of generative AI in an organization. And certainly the major aspect is the natural language understanding and translation, right? There is this component where I can ask a question and there's a bit of magic that somehow leads to a generated answer that looks pretty reasonable, right? It's a very human-like written answer. That's certainly a huge advantage in us interacting with other systems, is to use natural language.
Yeah.
But I think we obviously have to do more than that, and we have to figure out, I think, especially for you and your organizations, when does a workflow that's devised by an autonomous system, it devises a pathway to answer a question. When can that become a validated procedure that you can call on as a system of steps to achieve an objective? And that's going to be a challenge, right? If you sort of say, do this thing, and it does it, but in a way that nobody ever thought of doing, then if from a regulatory standpoint, is that a standardized, validated procedure to obtain that result? And is that something we can rely on or not? So at some point, somebody has to examine this and sort of make a decision that, yes, that fits the risk, or yes, that's an acceptable procedure. So we need a new kind of internal regulator that says, yeah, that's an acceptable way of doing something.
Yeah.
Because they're going to come up with ways that we haven't thought about doing it. And that's the opportunity, but it's also a threat from the organization's perspective.
Absolutely, you're quite right. Where we have those kind of proposed solutions coming from AI in a regulated environment, we're going to have to test them. And we have novelty all the time. So the fact that something's, if it's leapt from a local optimum to another local optimum, because it's arranged the data differently and had a different outcome, that's fine. We just need to test that it meets the requirements. So
yes.
It means that we'll probably end up testing a lot more paradigms than we do on a regular basis now, because there's new paradigms to test, which is great. That's what we want.
Yes.
It's just and so we're going to need to work hand in glove with the regulators on this as things come along, because unexplained surprises are never good. The other knock-on impact we're getting is it means that we can have those conversations about structuring your data and labeling it properly with people who haven't thought about this up to now, because everything's been within study, within experiment. Now the emphasis is across, for which you need standard approaches, homogeneity. You need to be able to call things the same thing in different data sets to be able to get a much more reliable outcome. And we couldn't have those conversations, but now they're so keen to have the exciting GenAI outcome. It's like, well, you can have the toy, but you have to go and do your homework first. None of my executives are in the room, so I can say.
Yeah, I mean, and also very practically, like we work in the area of precision medicine, and we have models that make very good predictions about what we ought to do with a particular patient. But in the standard operating protocol, the clinical protocol, you have to do 3 other diagnostic tests before you make that recommendation, right? And if you kind of decide, yeah, let's just do that right up front because we can sort of short circuit the whole procedure, the insurer might say you didn't follow protocol and we're not going to reimburse you for this process. So I think, and plus if anything goes wrong, then you didn't follow all the right steps. So I think this is indeed a really crucial challenge, which is if we get new suggested workflows and pathways, then how can they become accepted given this, everything from certification, reimbursement, all the other stuff that we think about when we want to put innovation into an impactful setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Allan, do you see also how can you maintain the accountability and transparency towards critical decisions that are made by GenAI? Like how Novo Nordisk is dealing with that?
Yeah, but I also guess that there would be a little different in how sensitive this would be, depending on what kind of data we're looking at.
Yeah.
I guess when we talk something which is associated with clinical trials and it goes to the regulatory authorities, the FDA, they're already working hard, I would assume, to figure out how to deal with this, and it's already hitting them. So they're going to be something around that which is going to have to be more regulated somehow and maybe a little more in control. If it comes to something you are doing to optimize something in the lab for a certain point, maybe there's a little more freedom to operate.
Yeah.
There, the problem maybe comes in another area which could be related to IPR and patenting and stuff like that. But that's a whole other discussion. But
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of this. It depends a lot on what kind of data assets we look at.
Yeah.
There is also the adoption of AI by the scientists, by the lab, by the different decision makers, by regulatory, etc. How do you feel about user adoption of GenAI across the drug development by the people, by the organization? Do you feel hurdle? Are people trusting it? Are they exciting to use it? What is the trends or the feeling, or do you feel like there is hurdles into adopting such a new technology?
I'll go for the, again, it depends on where it is in the pipeline and the level of rigor and risk. So early stage of the pipeline, absolutely. Later stage of the pipeline, yes, but for certain specific things. And as long as there are checks and balances in place and there's a human in the loop, there's excitement. Is there trust? No, not yet. But what we've got is people saying, this looks amazing. Can we use it for this scenario, this scenario, this scenario? And sometimes the challenge is, we don't know where the data is. Well, that's going to make it hard to feed it into the model. So there's some preparatory things that need to be done. So there's a lot of excitement about adoption. I think we're still at that point where we haven't had a big internal disaster, fantastic, but we also haven't had the real breakthrough in terms of how we apply this to the pipeline. So we built a big knowledge graph for our discovery organization over the last few years. We've put a GenAI interface on top of that. It's incredibly popular. It gives people great information. It's all public domain though, because we haven't put our internal data into that particular knowledge graph. We need to replicate that with other knowledge graphs. So the whole kind of assistant approach that you might have seen in the keynote speech this morning, that's really popular. What we aren't really tracking, and we probably should, is what are people using the outcomes to decide? That's the next step, is to understanding how that's impacting our ability to do our jobs.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, when ChatGPT came out and people start working with it, in our organization, we are in early research. So the first thing scientists do, that they try to test it, really interrogate it, and then they find out that it will hallucinate, give you the wrong answers or not consistent answers. So that's kind of where we started. So there's a huge interest in adopting it, but in order to convince people, it has to be a little precise and accurate. And that's going to happen as well, because everything is going to be improved there. Yep. But I think it's kind of going a little up, it's a little bumpy road, I think. But if it's a very scientific organization, then people there are only convinced by whether it's actually it's precise and can give them the right answers. That's the experience so far.
Yeah, I would say like two things. One is there's an element of utility, right? So the systems that we build need to be accurate.
Yeah.
They need to be robust to different inputs and still produce the expected outcome. They need to be transparent. They need to explain a little bit how something is answered. But then there's the other part, which is not the technical part. It's the human acceptability, right? I mean, is this bringing value or benefit to the people for which it's put in front of, right? Are the suggestions reasonable and within the line of thinking about the organization? And then does it act in an ethical manner, right? Does it not displace people, but help them to be productive and help them work together?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like the idea of human-centered artificial intelligence, right? Is it brings value to the group of people trying to do something. And we have a lot of boxes to check to make this work properly, right? To be accepted and to be embraced and to be built on, that people are like, this is cool, can we do more with it? Rather than, I tried this thing, it doesn't work, and get it out of here. And there's a big risk, given that there's so much hype around AI, that people see what's in the news and they go, great, this is going to come here.
Yeah.
And then they see what we actually deliver and they go, this is not at all what I thought you would be doing. So expectation management here, I think, is quite crucial. But it's also education. What is this thing and how does it work and when will it fail, right? When can you expect it to do that is also very important for users to understand.
Yeah, I think the educational aspect you point to is actually extremely important here, right? You have to get people acquainted with these technologies. You also have to explain them that it might not be perfect the first time. You have to try it out. Maybe the next generation, you have some kind of documentation system, which when you get the information retrieved, you also can link to the right papers and the source of information. Stuff like that, right? That would actually boost the reliability or the credibility of the system. So it's the journey I think you have to get people on.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mathew, is there some caution that you take at AstraZeneca with the user to...
Say again, sorry?
Is there some caution that you had at AstraZeneca to say like, manage the expectation of the user, how to...
We're desperately trying. There's a lot of enthusiasm right now.
Okay.
There's lots of people thinking this is going to solve my problem of I don't know where my data is and it's all unstructured. It's not. We're at that stage where there's still a lot of enthusiasm, but there is also caution about how this is going to be applied. I completely agree about the education side of things. We've put quite a lot of effort internally into building educational resources. Here's what it is. Here's how it can work with you. Not everybody wants to go through all that degreed learning pathway, but we've put it together, and it's a continual conversation about this. People are at very different stages of understanding in terms of what the potential is, what the real value will be, and we need to help raise that level of reliability. I think that's the critical piece. It's about the hallucination. A little story about the early days of GenAI. It was Google's Bard I used, not ChatGPT, and I went on and asked it to tell me about me. But I asked it to do in the style of Boris Johnson, our former Prime Minister. So it got all the facts wrong and denied. So it lied about me and denied it. So as an emulation of Boris Johnson, it was absolutely perfect. But in terms of, it was an early experience of hallucination.
Then I think there is managing the user, managing the expectation. You also mentioned about educating people.
Yeah.
Where are we in terms of expertise? Do we have also a surge in expertise? Is it easy to find the experts in GenAI applicability of the drug development? How do you deal with that? Finding the expert profile, finding the new... Michel, you are, of course, at the university, and you are in the forefront of that.
We are training the next generation.
But is it enough, or
Yes, so again, we are, there are two parts, right? So I think one is, building that technical expertise for these systems. And of course, we have programs in computer science and artificial intelligence and data science, but also now weaving in ethical and legal and societal aspects of these in our training programs. So people are familiar with these concepts and they understand them and think about the responsible use of artificial intelligence as they learn about the technology development. So you can rest assured that this is happening now, right? That the next trainees are getting this experience. But at the same time, in my last course, so I do a course on building and mining knowledge graphs, and I had a tutorial on the ethical use of large language models in the course. And so my principle, my policy is you are allowed to use language models for every task except where I otherwise indicate you cannot. Okay. And where can you not do it? Because I want you to fundamentally understand something and you need to know what the right result is so that you can use an automation tool in the future and be able to critically evaluate that. So that's kind of my approach, is learn how to do something with a technical foundation. Yeah. And then once you understand those principles and what can go right and wrong, then you feel free to apply it because I trust you have judgment about the outcome, right? Or how to use it. And I think this is an ongoing discussion because even my students are like, can I write a paper now with ChatGPT? And I go, no, but you can ask ChatGPT to give you feedback about that first draft that you write, because learning how to write is a technical competency of the training program, right? So it is also important, I think, with our users to have a gradation period of education, and also that you can kind of get more and more technical features as you gain more and more technical understanding. This is really important because we want to minimize misuse, right? And we want to maximize proper usage of technology.
That's interesting.
But I also guess that there's another challenge, and that maybe is legislation, right? So
yes,
there could come something suddenly, right? The legislation would always be a little behind the technology development. Yeah. So you could get a surprise at some point, having done something, and then suddenly, there might be something challenging.
Well, rest assured here also, I'm the coordinator for a project called Realm. It's a Horizon Europe project. And there we are trying to build a regulatory sandbox for AI, in particular medical software devices. And what we are trying to use is synthetic data generation to challenge medical devices that use machine learning and other AI technologies and see how they respond to inputs they have never seen before. But that is also, I think, important, that if you build a process that relies on a tool that has learned from some training data, you got to make sure it will respond with things you have not yet trained it with, right? So this is what we're trying to do for medical devices. Very important, especially if they're embedded in your body, that they work on people that that weren't part of the clinical trial. This is often the case, right? Yeah.
Mathew, do you want to intervene regarding
just back to the question of do we have enough experts
Yeah.
to do the education? I think I'd summarize it as a lot of very clever people have been learning as fast as they possibly can to become as expert as they can. Obviously, we engage with our ecosystem and community as well, but that's I've been encouraged by the speed with which people have been learning about these kind of technologies. It's not it's so, you know, most of this hasn't been around. Okay, the original principles have been around for decades, but the application that's come through is really quick, and it's happened relatively recently. So people are staying as far ahead as they can get, but they're learning very fast. So, but I'm very pleased to hear that the next generation of people are coming out of academia.
Yes, it actually, part of Realm also has a Realm Academy, and we are going to train the regulators on AI. Okay. This is a big gap. I mean, how can they regulate a technology that they have no expertise in?
Yeah.
So everybody needs to learn this.
Absolutely. I think it's not only the experts, the data scientists that need to be trained, but it's everyone and should be in the cursus of everyone, right? The chemists, the biologists, people from regulatories, and they all need to get into their approach and their knowledge regarding this GenAI approach. Yeah. Then we are heading to the last question. That will be like, if you would have an advice for the audience about what they need to take in consideration into embedding AI, GenAI, into their pipelines, what would you advise? Who want to start?
I mean, I think that my advice would be to start out with maybe a less, not too ambitious goal. Start demonstrating a clear value from it first. So to select use cases where it's very, very evident that this might not be perfect, but it has huge potential. Then I think you can start onboarding people and getting the interest going. And then everybody, I think, can agree that from now on, it's just going to go one way, and that is it's going to improve all the time. So I think the advice from my side would be that you start with a little smaller things, getting a good, solid, successful story out of it, and then you can build on that.
I would say try and structure your data as much as possible for input into your AI. You'll get a much better output if you do that. So if you're going to put your effort in, put it into the upfront management of your data before it goes into your solution. That will give you a much better outcome.
Then building your foundation before you go further. Michel,
you know, I'm a tinkering type of person, so I love things like hackathons and bringing people together and indeed identifying the use cases. Could it be used for something? Getting small groups and hacking something out. But that's just proof of concepts are exciting because you might get an initial result that goes, yeah, this might work. But it's really hard to go the extra mile, which is to develop the benchmark and really show that this will work on a broader set of inputs. So my advice is, do the exciting, bring people together, but you need to do the last mile, which is really figure out how is this not going to work and understand that part, because then you can avoid the disappointment later on when people say this isn't working and rebel against the AI gods, right?
You had an interesting point, which is like bringing people together. Do you also see a perspective that GenAI is bringing new collaboration setup across between different teams that pattern that were not there before? Is it something that you see emerging, like fostering the collaboration? Mathew, perhaps?
Yes. I mean, one of the things that I think one of the previous speakers said is that we're democratizing AI. And so you can now, in a natural language question, you can ask questions of complex data. Prior to that, it was the realm of the data scientists and the AI experts who would build their models, and then the collaboration generally was not as iterative. It was here's my problem, I'm going to go away and sort it out. Here's my answer. That doesn't look quite right. Okay, I'll tweak it. I'll go away and sort it out. Now you've got much closer iterations, but we're also having to change how we engage with the customers of AI, because It's suddenly people who have no deep understanding of the data and the methods. They've got a question they need asking. They're experts in their question. They know their data, they know the business problem they're trying to solve, they're experts in that. They're not experts in the technology that solves it for them. So in some ways we're trying to safeguard them and work, but we have to work differently, because previously we're going to go away and do that in a darkened room. Now we're sitting next to you doing it while you're asking the question live in the interface. So we're having to work out how we change, how we engage, and how we explain.
Right, then make your foundation, start small, and collaborate, bring people together to make the right output. Any last word before we close the panel that you would like to share with the audience? No?
No.
Great. Then thank you for staying with us until the end. If you want to continue the conversation, we are happy to take a further question now, or please pass by the booth of ONTOFORCE along the alley a little bit further. Thank you so much for being with us today, and wishing you a good evening.
Thank you. Okay.